Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. The first stage of the Chunin exams itself was unchanged, strangely enough. I was kind of expecting something different, what with all the changes I had apparently caused in canon. It was still a welcome thing though. I was growing tired of being surprised by things at every turn, even if I was getting used to the deviations. Like when Kabuto kept to himself instead of pulling the information cards from canon. All this meant that, as we were told where to sit, obviously separated from our teammates, I was simply there waiting to have permission to start writing my answers. After all, if I didn't know the answers to the questions, I would be surprised. And even if I was, I had a very solid plan to find the planted Chunin and get the information anyway. And so, the first test began. Turning the sheet around, I looked at the questions and smiled. With a slight shake of my head, I started writing. They were beyond a normal genin's knowledge, that was for sure. I would go as far as saying that they were hard for a Chunin, even. But considering the real point of the test, it made sense. Regardless of that, I had done a whole lot of self-study with library books and books I had gotten from Danza, not to mention things that Anko taught me every so often during our training sessions, and so, it was pretty easy to answer the questions. Still, I could still gather information during this part, even if it wasn't the information I was expected to. Or who knows, maybe it was meant to be done for the reason I had come up with. Living thread, web sense, I called out mentally, not even stopping my writing. Slowly, I moved a wire that was still inside the pouch on my hips. Good thing the jutsu didn't need skin contact to be used, just close proximity. First, I wrapped one end to one of my pants belt loops. From there, I moved the free end down to the floor, carefully keeping the thread glued to the chair to hide it better. Time passed, and eventually, I could sense the whole room through my wire. It wasn't like I needed to move it much, really. With 20 meters of range, I barely needed to move the wire at all, but I wanted to have a good view of the outside of the room too, just in case. Done with my sheet, I leaned back and looked straight at the proctor. My focus though, was on what I was receiving from my jutsu. Ino was already copying the things she had gotten with her jutsu. Shikamaru was writing his and Chaoji's exam. Hinata, obviously, was having a pretty easy time. Kiba had Akamaru spying for him where he was sitting on top of his head. Shino was gathering the answers with his bugs. Tenten was using wires and mirrors. How she set them up, I had absolutely no idea, but I would bet on her setting those with some distraction or another during the time we had to wait. Rock Lee was using her mirrors too. Neji didn't even need them. Kankuro didn't go to the bathroom this time, although his trick didn't really need that anyway. He had added a new examiner in the shape of one of his puppets, which I guessed he could share sight with in some way. Same with Gaara and his Sandai technique. They probably worked in a similar way to my web sense, although instead of adding a new sense, they worked with a pre-existing one. Maybe I should have started with that. I mused. Tamrai though, probably didn't need help at all. What with her being said to be almost as smart as Shikamaru. Sasuke was copying someone else with his Sharingan, which... Wait, I paused with a frown. When did he unlock it? Didn't he unlock it during the wave mission? But it changed since there was no Zabuza and Haku, so when did he unlock it? And how hadn't I known, was another question. Did they purposely hide that from me? A surprise of some kind. It was a possibility, but I guessed I would find out eventually. Sakura, for her part, obviously didn't need help with a knowledge-based test. Naruto surprised me though. The blonde had set up seals on the underside of several people's desks, which I guessed he could use to know what they were writing. That begged the question though, would he give his speech and end up motivating some people to stay and take the last question? Pushing thoughts for which I had no answers to aside, I tried to gather information on people I didn't know much about. The results on that front were frustrating. Haku had used his bloodline limit to make a version of Tenten's idea, apparently, making ice mirrors for himself and his teammates. And as for the concerning Iwa and Kumo teams, they answered without cheating, as far as I could sense. And that was bullshit, if anyone asked me. If one or two of them could do so, it would be fine. After all, Sakura, Shikamaru, Tumrai and I could answer without help, so it stood to reason that some of them could too. But all of them? Yeah, I wasn't buying that. And then there was Orochimaru. I didn't remember if the girl from Kusagakure was replaced with the snake bastard before the first test or before the second. If it was the first, my jutsu didn't pick up on that, which sucked. I would have certainly tried to do something if I could at least pick up on his presence. Maybe it would have been for nothing, maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. But the man was a threat to everyone I cared about, and I would certainly take some risks if it meant ruining his plans. It was not to be, I thought with a sigh. Still, I kept an eye on my teammates at all times. If I could get the smallest excuse to point fingers at them, I would. But the two of them were too goddamn good at faking being normal, if a bit on the old side, Genin. Bored already, I cancelled both jutsu and leaned forward, resting my cheek on my palm. There was no need to keep wasting chakra, especially with what was to come. I had already gathered the info that I could. Now, I just had to wait for the test to be over. As I did, I let my mind wander towards the changes in canon and what they could possibly mean. The Mist Ninja being here was a surprise. But not that much of a surprise. I could take a guess that the delay in the exams was for them to make it. I wondered if the civil war was officially over. These were rebels in their team, so it stood to reason that they had won. Unofficially though, the war was probably still ongoing, with remnants of the other factions still trying to take back what they had lost. It was something that could be predicted easily. This, while good for the Leaf, meant an approaching headache for me. After all, it meant that Yagura was probably dead already, and that had to mean something regarding Akatsuki. I had reread everything regarding the mist in my notebooks when I was told we were aiding a side of the Civil War. My knowledge hadn't been the best with a lot of things though, so I wasn't sure if Akatsuki had gotten the Three Tails directly at the end of the Civil War or if they had gotten it after it reformed. Hell, maybe Yagura wasn't even dead and was instead imprisoned somewhere. And wasn't that an entirely different situation to be concerned about? Iwa and Kumo were the concerning ones though. Because there was a very real chance that one of them was allied with Orochimaru. There was, however, a chance that they weren't. Suna had an agreement with Konoha, that was what the other nations knew. Whether they knew of how strained things were between the two had grown through the years was a mystery, but it was better to assume they knew. In any case, the situation with the mist probably worried the other villages. After all, it threatened the balance that the nations had if two of them started working together. And there was no way that Kiri wouldn't form an alliance with Konoha. There was nothing official yet, but if they didn't eventually, I would have been very surprised. And that might have been a factor to the other two being here even if they weren't in league with Orochimaru. To keep an eye on everyone else and make a statement, to prove their strength. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those in the teams they sent weren't actually Genin but Chunin in disguise. I would have suspected Jounin too, but that would have been more of an insult to everyone else's intelligence if they thought that would fly by the others. All these spoke of trouble for my friends and I. The forest of death would be even more dangerous than I had expected it to be, even with me acknowledging that it would be different from canon. This is so troublesome, I thought to myself, biting my thumbnail in annoyance. It said something about me that I could see different reasons why these changes were very bad and couldn't think of one way this could be good. I blamed Danza. Oh. Kabuto Povi. I was growing both annoyed and worried. Why is he looking at us like that? I couldn't help but wonder, feeling the red-eyed gaze of my teammate fixed on the back of my head. Did Yoroi mess up? The introductions had gone well. The satyr had been understandably surprised by their everything, really. From their age to their skill sets. But after that, everything went well. Both Yoroi and I had even gotten a good look at his repertoire. But ever since we made our way for the actual exams, he had been watching the two of us like a hawk. Yoroi definitely gave something away, I seethed as I finished the sheet of questions, feigning relief at being done. As if there was any difficulty to the test. If Sato thought he could catch a mistake from me of all people, he was very wrong. After all, I had been spying right under the noses of everyone in Konoha for years. If even Danza, the man that had had me trained, couldn't find me in his own territory, this genin had absolutely no chance whatsoever, no matter how prodigious he was. This, however, posed a problem. I really hope this won't continue through the forest, I thought to myself, internally grimacing. There couldn't be failure in the forest or everyone involved would be as good as dead, except Orochimaru. I'm going to fucking kill Yoroi. Oh. IG Povi. Eventually, the time for the last question came and I was not really surprised when Naruto didn't give his speech. Instead, he sat there looking pretty happy with himself. He should be, I had checked and all his answers were right. This got me thinking about Naruto's changes from his canon self. I had to admit, when my presence ended up with the blonde not having the shadow clone jutsu in his repertoire, I had been worried and afraid for him. After all, it was his signature move. But this seal-oriented Naruto was doing pretty well for himself. I would go as far as saying that he was better off like this. Granted, if we were to add the shadow clones to his skill set, he would be a force to be reckoned with. But if I had to choose between canon Naruto and this one hands down. The original had a clever head, some tools and a one-man army technique. But that army's specs weren't all that, to be honest. Now, though. Naruto had a clever head, a lot of tools and even more tricks that he could pull off with seals. It may not sound like much, when said like that. But the point was made when you looked at the part that said clever head. A smart person with lots of options was a very scary thing to go against. It gave him 1,000 ways to mess with his opponent. And we should thank our lucky stars that he can't, for the life of him, use genjutsu, I thought, shuddering at the very idea. Pushing scary possibilities aside, I looked dispassionately as more and more genin raised their heads and gave up. I could have taken Naruto's place in the plot and given a speech of my own to motivate people to stay, but what was the point of that? Personally, I thought this was what should have happened. Yeah, Naruto's speech was cool and all, but if those people were already having doubts here, then they didn't make the cut to begin with. The only reason to make more people stay in the exam would be to have easier targets in the forest. But honestly, I wasn't afraid of anybody in these exams. No, my only fear was Orochimaru. Everyone else I could deal with, even Gaara. Granted, I probably couldn't win against the Suna Jinchuriki, but I could certainly escape him, which was enough for me not to fear him. So, I wasn't too worried about the second test itself. I was more worried about Sannin that could drop on top of my head. And even then I thought, gulping down my nervousness as my eyes lost focus on my surroundings and instead locked on a blue screen that only I could see. Inner strength. Increased resistance to outside influence on the user's mind and body. Not applied to genjutsu. Inner strength was the first perk I ever got. I didn't even remember exactly when it happened, but I had got it through meditation. It was my ace in the hole, in case everything else failed and encountering Orochimaru became inevitable. I didn't know if it would work if the bastard used his cursed mark on me, but, at that point, it would be my only hope. With these teammates I considered, holding back a grimace. I really hope it works, because I can't see a way out of this that doesn't involve killing them after our first step into the forest. Much to my dismay, I had come back to that plan more and more after the reveal of Kabuto and Yoroi. Granted, I could ditch them, but how did I go about explaining that I just up and left my teammates during the second test? At least, if I killed them, I could spin a story about how they were spies. It wouldn't even be a complete lie. Accusing them with them alive opened the possibility of an investigation that might show how I didn't have any proof. Yes, Yamanakars were a thing, but I would never show my knowledge to anyone, and I was sure at least Kabuto should have a way around that. But the killing plan's weak point was that I immediately failed the test if I didn't have my teammates. And, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that big of a drawback. After all, the exams would fly straight out of the window without even having a chance to be finished, if the snake bastard got his way. But there was also Gaara to be considered. Or, more specifically, what Gaara could do to one of my friends if they were set against each other during preliminaries. No, I had to be there, if only to flicker someone out of a sand death trap. So, in the end, I was trapped with those two. And it sucks this time, I did grimace. You've just passed the first test, I blinked as Ibuki finished the announcement, breaking me from my thoughts. Then, I almost sighed when I realized that we still had to hear the whole explanation for the exam. Still, I used that time to prepare myself for the forest of death. As much as I knew what was coming and could theorize the changes and such, there was very little that I could do to prepare. As the door opened and in came Raider, was his name, right? I wondered, surprised to see that Anko wasn't the examiner for the second test. Although, I shouldn't be, considering that she is my sensei and all that a part of me pointed out. I'm Raider Namiyashi, the proctor for the second test, the man introduced himself. Now, if you would follow me, I'll explain it to you on our way to where it'll be held. Definitely less impressive than Anko's entrance, I mused, smirking to myself. My sensei would certainly be proud of that thought. Was that part of the exam in canon? I wondered, as Raider explained how they would let us inside the training grounds at different entrances and through the span of an hour. It almost felt like they were directly targeting me with that, since I had been planning on just flickering towards one of the entrances just as we were let in and taking out a team. That would have been too easy, huh? I thought as I picked up our scroll, a heaven scroll. The other two didn't even try to take it. They just passively walked behind me, letting me do as I wished. Previously, they had said some crap about how I was their first real chance of passing the exams, and on they had gone. I half listened, really, since I knew they were lying through their teeth. Wonder if I would have noticed that they are bad guys. Soon enough, and after signing the waiver that absolved the village from anything that could happen to us, my team was standing in front of one of the gates. The Forest of Death had become a place that I liked to visit, to the point where I couldn't wait to have free access to it to make some drawings. Now it looked as menacing as the name sounded. So, plan? I asked the other two after stepping into the training ground, not really expecting anything. Honestly, I hoped they wouldn't give any ideas, because I knew I couldn't trust anything that they said. Tracking is not really in our skill set, Kabuto said, scratching the back of his head embarrassedly. It really annoyed me how well the guy acted. So, I guess we'll follow your lead here. Yoroi simply nodded. Can you be any more of an extra? I thought, suppressing a sigh. Great, now I'll be paranoid that every group we find has Orochimaru. Isn't that just peachy? Because, if they didn't care where we went or where we looked, it meant that Orochimaru would come for us instead of them guiding me towards him. I was damned anyway, it seemed, not that I expected anything else, really. Okay then. I replied with a nod and a deep breath in. What are the chances of anything good happening in this forest? Shaking those thoughts from my head, I decided to focus. No escaping the shitstorm that's coming, I told myself. Let's get this over with. Follow me, I said simply, not even turning to see my teammates as I started tree hopping towards the center of the forest, the tower. Living thread, web sense, I called out mentally, as we moved, snapping ninja wire in every direction and getting a pretty good mental image all around. The forest was big, but there were enough teams that I was confident I would find someone sooner or later. Either that or a trail. I only needed to stay focused, looking for a hint. Shame that I'll probably still not see Orochimaru coming. I had tried, during the last 6 months, to come up with a jutsu that could help me with the Snake Sage. In the end, I came up short. He just had too much experience, too many jutsu and too much of everything, basically. If I had to go against someone like Kakashi, or Kyoinai, or Matogai, any of them, I could find a weak spot somewhere. But Orochimaru was a well-rounded character that was far out of my league. There weren't weaknesses that I could think of, which meant that the only way I could fight him was if I was as strong or stronger than him. And, yeah, that wasn't the case. Yet. Kabuto called behind me, almost making me stop moving. Yeah. Do you hear that? I blinked before frowning. My threads hadn't found anything in their range yet. My ears didn't pick up on anything either, besides the normal sounds of the forest. What is he talking about? And then, I tensed up. He knows something is coming. He doesn't have to actually hear anything. That, or he had better hearing than me, which was a possibility. If he could boost his resistance and regeneration with medical jutsu, who was to say that he couldn't enhance his senses to be like an Inuzuka? Gotta work on my Ioryo jutsu once this mess is over. No, I don't. And then I heard it. Faintly, in the distance, the sound of trees falling. It didn't stay like that for long though. It grew louder and louder, closer and closer. I could only smile bitterly once my web sense picked up on what it was. A gigantic snake. Kabuto seemed pretty dedicated to his role in this, but I ignored him as Orochimaru's summon drew a line between me and my teammates. With a twist, its tail smacked them across the forest. Instantly, I deactivated my weights and called for all my energy skills. Here's hoping, I thought to myself as I used a flicker away from the creature. But I didn't even get to the point where I would stop my dash. Midway through the jutsu, a foot kicked me right on the ribs, sending me flying against a tree. "We can't have that, can we?" Ijikun voice said, and as I skidded down the bark until I hit the ground, I desperately tried to get some more air in my lungs. "Who are you?" I gasped out, looking at the shape standing on a branch in front of me. "I am." "Body flicker," I called out again, dashing away. This time, a hand grasped me midair by the neck and held me up. "That was quite rude," he said, a disgusting smile that I could have lived without seeing firmly on his face. "Do you know what happens to rude boys?" "I know who you are," I spat out, forcing the words through my constricted throat. His eyes under his disguise grew interested, the strength of his grasp lessening the smallest bit. "Lightning flicker," I called out, kicking with both my feet towards his chest. The fake Kusagakyo ninja dissolved into a mass of mud around my legs, and a second later I was smacked once more, almost burying me into the earth. Immediately afterwards, he stood over me, a foot on each side of my chest. He was close, really close. As if daring me to do something, as if mocking that I couldn't touch him. "You said something about knowing who I am," he asked me, his tone losing some of that happy /creepy tone he had. "Ha, did I annoy you, snake bastard?" "Yeah, I did," I muttered, staring right into his eyes. They were what I expected them to be now though, yellow, slitted snake eyes. "You are one ugly motherfucker." I smirked, a snap was heard, and ninja wires closed in around him. Those little pauses he gave me to talk were really useful. God bless villains' love for their own voices, I thought to myself. I didn't get him with the threads though, only managing to get him to move away from me. Temporarily, of course. With living threads still active, I moved mine around myself, almost like a web-like shield. Slowly, I pulled myself off the ground with a groan. In front of me stood the disguised Sannin, looking bemusedly at my attempt of protection. "Do you think you are safe behind that?" Orochimaru was interrupted as the cackling of lighting hit his hand when he went to touch it. I had instantly used stunning thread. The bastard didn't grow annoyed or anything though, he simply smiled condescendingly. "How cute," he said, before doing two hand seals and creating a wave of mud behind himself, sending it straight at me. For my part, I grimaced, knowing what was coming. Lightning flicker. Once more, while I could move away, I was interrupted mid-dash, this time with a punch to the jaw. He didn't stop there, another fist connected with my gut, pushing the air out of my lungs again. No chance at all, like expected, I thought bitterly through the pain, as Orochimaru kicked me on the back, sending me rolling on the ground. "Are you done with your pitiful attempt at fighting? Who the fuck are you?" I spat out, wearily pushing myself up. It wouldn't do to attract more attention to myself by knowing more than I should. I've been acting a whole lot during this stupid exams. "Oh, now you are interested," he mocked with a lazy smirk. "You are not a genin," I pointed out. "A bit full of yourself, aren't you?" "I'm awesome like that," I choked as his hand wrapped around my neck again, pushing me against a tree. I felt the need to retch there and then when the bastard pushed his face right up to mine, and used his stupidly long tongue to lip my cheek. "You certainly are," he whispered. "To survive with only a shredded arm and a cut on your cheek." Blood left my face as I realized what he was talking about. He had licked right where I had been cut during the sword's mission. He knows. You did so splendidly well too. It was you, wasn't it? I asked, dread filling my chest. You messed with my mission, I accused. I did, he grinned, his lips stretching inhumanly wide. Why? Because I needed to test you, he let out a laugh that chilled my bones. I needed to know if you were worth changing my plans, he explained, although to anyone else it wouldn't have made sense. And you so are. Then, he went silent, smiling in place. A second later, he opened his mouth, two fangs standing out from his other teeth. And I felt, resigned as they pierced the skin on my left shoulder. As I felt the burning of the cursed mark forming on me. The bastard's technique sent a shot of pain through my body, making me whimper pathetically. So much for changes. I thought to myself as he let go and I fell to my knees. So much for growing stronger. It couldn't be helped. Even if I knew he was out of my league. I still felt that I stood a chance, somewhere in my psyche. I had grown confident, it seemed. It was one of the reasons I had chosen to try and fight, after all. New skill acquired, cursed seal, first stage LVL1. I pushed through the pain as I dismissed the screen. It wouldn't do to pass out here and now. I needed to stay conscious. After all, arrogance wasn't the only reason. A smile formed on my face. Oh. Why are you smiling, Adrian? The true monster asked. You are late, sensei. Sorry about that, brat. Thought you would come and say hello to your old teacher, Anko. Orochimaru asked with that disgustingly satisfied tone of his, as if everything that happened was part of his plan. And the worst thing was, that he was probably right. Something like that, my sensei admitted, and I could hear the smirk on her face. The reason became apparent when, as Orochimaru turned to my left to look at Anko, someone else stabbed him right on the back, the black blade coming out of his chest. It's not going to be that easy, is it? I thought wryly. A good attempt, Raider-kun, the bastard's voice said, this time from up on the trees on my right. At the same time, the body that had been standing in front of me started dripping down, showing that it was a mud clone. Called it, I grimaced, annoyed at being right. Taking a deep breath in, I slowly stood up. Relax, kiddo, Anko said, apparently having come down from the tree she had been on and standing next to me and Raider, the three of us looking straight at the snake Sannin. You just don't look away from a man like that, especially considering that he was an enemy. We've got it from here. You think you can take me? With two to Kubetsu Jounin? Orochimaru asked, sounding just as amused as before. I'm almost insult. I interrupted his little speech, one of my ninja wires shooting up from the branch he had been standing on and wrapping around his calf. Instantly, I used both stunning thread and chakra flow. I wanted to shock the bastard silly, or, more realistically, give him a nasty surprise. A groan escaped his mouth and, for the first time, he lost his insufferable smile. Instead, he scowled down at his leg, which, apparently, had stopped hurting him after the first second for some reason. Gotta hate stupidly powerful people, I grumbled mentally. That wasn't nice, Adrian, he said, as he turned to glare at me. Anko, for her part, spoke right afterwards, positively delighted by my actions. On the contrary, that was perfect, EI. She didn't get to finish the sentence, bending forward and one hand snapping towards her neck. I knew exactly why she did that too, a shot of pain worse than anything I had felt before hit me right where the cursed mark had been placed on me. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath as my everything started to burn, the sensation focusing mainly on the mark. I would have loved to play some more. The Sannin spoke calmly, his voice cold and unforgiving. A stark contrast from his amused tone from before, to be sure. Raider, as the only unaffected one of us, took a defensive stance. You know, catch up with my old student and all that. But there's always someone willing to ruin the moment. You are weak, all of you, he continued, his voice cutting right through my pain, even as my white spots started filling my vision. He is doing that on purpose, a part of my mind realized. Letting me hear him clearly despite the mark's effect. Fuck you, a bigger portion of my conscience decided, as I snarled at the air, my sight long since blurred due to what Orochimaru was doing to my mark and my sensei's. Joke was on him, it was actually helping distract me from the overall pain my body felt due to the marking I had just gone through. Another wire shot up, my mind barely able to keep itself focused on that alone, and wrapped around his other leg. Won't catch me with that a second time, the snake bastard tried to mock. Raider, thankfully, realized what I was doing and dashed towards our enemy, his blade quickly cleaving through Orochimaru's body and cutting it in half. To our dismay, it turned out to simply be another clone. To my dismay, I felt his presence appear again through my web sense. This time right behind me. Still too weak, Iji-kun, he whispered in my ear. Iji. Then everything turned black. Oh. I woke up sometime later with really no idea about how long I had been out. The light that came through the tree branches certainly wasn't enough to get a gauge on that, although, at least I knew it was day. A groan escaped my mouth as I tried to sit up, my shoulder sending waves of pain even now. Dulled, certainly, but it was still there. I see you are awake, a voice said, and I instantly tensed up, calling for living threads and web sense to get an idea of what was going on. I quickly found out, and it wasn't reassuring at all. Had us worried for a while there, Kabuto said, a friendly, relieved smile on his face. I didn't believe it for a second. What happened? I asked, as I tried to relax and drag my body so that my back would rest against a nearby tree. These two are supposed to be my team, I reminded myself as I eyed the two spies. Gotta show that I can somewhat stand them. Are you two okay? Better than you, certainly. Yoroi surprised me by replying at all. The guy had hardly said a word since we had met. We were smacked away. I don't even know what they did to you. I don't either, I said bitterly, placing a hand over my cursed mark. It didn't help at all though. By the time we got to you, the proctor of the exam was standing next to you, Kabuto informed me, and I listened intently. Maybe he was lying, maybe he wasn't. But whatever he said could be useful one way or another. Said something about outside interference. He also told us that we were still in the exam, even if they had to get involved. And that you must not use jutsu. What's up with that? As if they would have me disqualified because of Orochimaru, I mused, suppressing a smirk. Wonder if the other villages will find out. That could bring trouble, I realized then with a frown. Don't know, but I certainly won't follow that, I replied easily. This exam is difficult enough as it is, it really wasn't, but I was with the two people that would let me get away with using jutsu. After all, they were Orochimaru's agents, of course they wouldn't care if I used chakra and made the curse mark affect me. Hell, they probably wanted me to do so and had orders to try and coerce me to. As predicted, they simply shrugged it off. That looks painful, the Meidnin pointed out as I grimaced and winced when I tried to stand up, another shot of pain running through my shoulder. You have no idea, I muttered. A part of my mind mocking that he probably had more of an idea than most people. Maybe I can help, he offered, and I almost narrowed my eyes at him. I mean, I'm a medic. We have to deal with pain, believe it or not, he added with a grin that I half-heartedly returned. He won't kill me, I reasoned. Orochimaru needs me, so he won't. That doesn't mean he can't screw me over with some poison. Do I risk it with my poison resistance LVL 18? They are sure to know that I've raised it. Acting is hard, I almost groaned. But then I tried to change my position and a hiss escaped my mouth. I can't go through the exam like this. I can barely move. Sure, I accepted with a weary smile. I really need some help with this. No problem, what are teammates for, he replied with a wide smile. I could almost believe it. He promptly took out a small vial from his pouch and with a quick succession of hand seals, he used some kind of jutsu to inject the liquid into me. I would be a lying liar if I said that I was completely fine with what was going on. I wouldn't trust these two as far as I could have thrown them in my past life. But I needed to be able to stand to actually do shit, which meant that I would have to trust this guy just this once. I hated it. I hated that I had to rely on him, and I hated that I had been marked now. I had been training my ass off. I had worked so hard that it was considered unhealthy for my mental state for most of that time. I had pushed forward for years. And what did I get for that? A mark that. No, I shook my head, as I felt whatever Kabuto used was taking effect slowly. Keep a calm head, that's what the snake bastard wants. Relax. Actually, I should test that theory right away. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the hard surface of the tree. Mentally, I called for the skill that had come to mind. And I slowly let go of reality, delved into my own thoughts and I opened my eyes and looked at Konoha. Or, my mental recreation of Konoha, that is. I was right, I realized with a grin. I could feel it, the thawing presence in my mindscape. I had worked on this place for a long time. I knew it better than I knew the back of my hand. Come here, you snake bastard, I thought, concentrating on pulling at the presence. It was strong. It loomed over my mindscape like I imagined Kyuubi had done over the real village. But, here, I was God. There was nothing that could battle me in my own mind. Impressive mindscape, Ijikun the guy spoke, his body in my mind looking like what he actually looked like instead of the face he had literally stolen for the exam. All around him, purple chakra seemed to dance around him like a flame-like aura. Even more impressive is your Kanta. He shut up because I fucking wanted him to shut the fuck up. I was done with him. Or, at least, I was done with this version of him. I wanted nothing to do with it. You made a mistake, Orochimaru, I told him, my mental projection speaking with a cold tone and an impassive expression. You made this thing so that you could escape death, I spoke, feeling that rush of power that came from knowing that my opponent had no chance. Maybe I kind of get why villains speak so damn much, I mused amusedly. Mind Orochimaru's eyes widened. But you aren't the boss here. This is my mind, and you've got no power here. Now chains appeared from the ground and wrapped around him, leaving the chakra untouched. How about I show you what awaits you on the other side? And then, with but a thought, I made him sink through the ground. Pushing the sliver of consciousness he had left in the mark straight into the void recreation that existed in my mindscape. Months of planning resulted in this. I had theorized that he would have a presence in my mindscape. Granted, if he didn't, I had some backup plans for that too, but it was nice for Planner to work right away. Now, he would never be able to touch anything important. Actually, he would never be able to touch anything at all in my mind. He was in the void, and the void was just that, nothing, complete and absolute emptiness. Fiercely and decisively, I worked on my mindscape once more, this time to ensure that his presence would remain exactly where it should. I wasn't sure he could have moved in the void, but I wasn't going to risk it. My first thought had been to destroy whatever it was that he left with his cursed mark, or at least try to. But I couldn't do that. Why? Because I needed the power-up that came with it. I wasn't sure if the mark would work if I got rid of the snake bastard's pseudo-horcrux. And thus, I did the next best thing, I made him as good as dead where my mind was concerned. I could get rid of him when I no longer needed the mark. Opening my eyes, I realized that I no longer felt pain. "Thanks for that," I muttered, forcing the words out of my mouth but trying to sound genuine. So Yoroi spoke, as I cracked my neck to see if I could relax my tense shoulders. It was nice to know that the pain had receded. If Caputo wasn't such a slimy bastard, I would have actually been grateful. "What's the plan now?" I looked at them as they looked at me. I almost wanted to scoff at them. They really expected the half-dead guy to give the orders. "Fine. This is what we do now." "Oh. Team 10. The clearing was silent, broken branches all around and even splashes of dark red blood covering the trees. Leaves could be seen still falling from the confrontation. "This is more of a drag than I thought it would be," the Naruto grumbled to himself, barely keeping himself on his feet by leaning against a tree. "You didn't even take a hit," the Yamane KRS countered, annoyance clear in her voice as she held her stomach. She winced as the phantom pains that came from receiving a punch while her mind occupied someone else's body. The third member of the trio, one Chaoji Akimichi, laid on the floor, and if not for his faint snoring, the other two would have been worried he was dead. The bruises all over his body certainly weren't reassuring at all. Neither was the blood running down from his nose. Troublesome Shikamaru sighed before starting to make his way to his sleeping friend. The three of them had been ambushed by a team of Iwa genin. If they even were that, the Naruto couldn't help but think. They had been entirely too good to be normal genin. And while he lived with a constant reminder that there were exceptional people out there, none of them had the aura that Ig had, or even Sasuke or Naruto. No, they felt normal but much better than them. They were Chunin, Shikamaru decided, internally thanking Ig for motivating not only him but also Ino and Chaoji to train harder. No way they would have been able to fight the Iwa team if they had been like they had before. As it was, they had won just because the other team underestimated them. Granted, it wasn't much since they already knew that Team 10 was made of clan heirs, and as such they expected them to be troublesome. But the younger trio had still surpassed those expectations, resulting in their ambusher's defeat. Thank God that they had the scroll we needed, Shikamaru thought, positively relieved at the reveal once he checked one of their opponent's unconscious body. "Can you help me move Chaoji, Ino?" the Naruto asked tiredly. When his female teammate didn't move, and instead opted to stare away from him, he suppressed a sigh and grimaced. His eyes moved towards a specific Iwa shinobi in particular. The one that wasn't breathing. Of course one of them had to die, he thought as he dragged a hand over his face and groaned, his heart twisting painfully in his chest. It wasn't our fault, a part of his head told him, and, logically, it was right. After all, it wasn't their fault that the Iwa guys had decided to ambush them. It wasn't their fault that the guy had flown in the worst possible direction and got killed by a tree branch of all things when Chaoji hit him with a punch. Still, it made him feel like shit, and he thanked whatever god was watching that Chaoji had fallen unconscious after the fight was over. Dealing with that in the middle of the fight's aftermath would have been a nightmare. As it was though. "Ino, let's get away from here," Shikamaru pushed, making it an order instead of a question. That wasn't the time to have a mental breakdown, much less the place. As his blonde teammate blinked back from wherever her mind had taken her, she nodded stiffly and walked up to him, picking up Chaoji from the other side, and both started dragging him away. "They wouldn't have killed you," an accusatory voice whispered in his ear. And maybe it was right. After all, Shikamaru was sure the other villages wouldn't risk angering Konoha by killing Clan Es, Chuan in exams or not. That was, if they knew that we were Es. Which was a big if. Considering that they had sent Chuan in though, it was highly probable that they also knew exactly who was participating. As they moved through the forest, both Yamanaka and Nara couldn't help but remember all those months ago, when they had welcomed back Ig after his disaster of a mission. How they had all spoken to him reassuring words about how they didn't think any less of him for what he had done. Both genin couldn't help but feel their already considerable respect for the satyr rise even more, since his mission had been even worse than what they had gone through. It also made them feel much better, knowing that there would be someone to talk to once they were done. Someone that understood and had already gone through something similar. Neither knew how they would have reacted if that wasn't the case. "You are both okay, right?" The Akimichi's voice startled both of his teammates and they almost dropped him to the ground. "For God's sake, don't do that again." Ino hissed under her breath in order not to get the attention of anyone or anything that may be out there in the forest. "Yes, we are okay, Chaoji." "Glad you are, too," Shikamaru answered. "Good, that's good," the other boy replied, his tone confusing both of his teammates. It sounded strange. Chaoji trailed off, gathering his thoughts as he pushed to stand by himself. Both Ino and Shikamaru shared a concerned glance before they turned back to the Akimichi. "Lots of bad things can happen in a mission," the boy finally said, and both of the others immediately remembered when he had said those words. "We can only learn from them and expect better of ourselves in the future. That's what my father told me when I told him about my fears about being shinobi," Chaoji continued as he started walking forward through the forest, his teammates soon following. "My mother though, she just told me to come back home. That she would be happy as long as I came back. I don't think I understood that until now." Not Ino nor Shikamaru could see it, but both knew their teammate was crying just by the sound of his voice. They understood though, it hit the Akimichi much harder than it had them. He had been the one to deliver the hit, after all, not to mention that he had also been the one that was the most affected by violence in general. "We are going back home," Chaoji the Nara offered, his usually bored tone replaced by a soft one. "Everything's going to be okay," the Yamanaka followed, with a reassuring hand placed on the Akimichi's shoulder. "Yeah," Chaoji sniffed. "Yeah, we are, and it's going to be. Oh. Anko Mitarashi. Useless. She was fucking useless. The only thing they had to do was entertain Orochimaru enough for more jounin to back them up. Just that, and from there, they would deal with the snake bastard. But no, he just glared at her and her mark rendered her powerless, dropping to her knees as if she was a kid under killing intent. Ig had held up, even though he had just been fucking marked. So, why hadn't she? Was she just that weak? "I am, aren't I?" Anko thought with a bitter chuckle escaping her lips. "Killing Orochimaru, yeah, Right, a tear escaped her eye as her hand balled into a fist. A second later, the wall cracked after her knuckles tried to bury themselves into it. Couldn't even remain standing in his presence. Years of training, years of dark dreams about ending the life of the man that had ruined her life, all for nothing. All of it squashed under the reality that she would never come even close to his level. Anko had been delusional, thinking she could go against one of the sages. And that wasn't even the worst part. No, the worst part was that now her student was one of Orochimaru's victims too. And Anko had been there, right there. Just a second too late. A second that would have her student haunted for life just like she had been. Too late to save him, but just in time to see his body spasming as the burn of the mark burned its brand into his chakra system. IG, that student that had frightened Anko at first, reminding her so much of her teacher. That student that wormed his way into her heart, showing her that despite how similar they were, they had just as many differences. That he was, in the end, his own person. Am I a monster? If Anko had her way, IG would never ask a question like that. And she would be damned if her teacher came and destroyed the life she had managed to piece back together for herself. Her student would get over this and he would never wonder if the mark had changed him for the worst. Maybe she had failed to stop Orochimaru. Maybe she had failed in her personal mission to kill him. But she wouldn't fail her student. This, I swear, she thought resolutely. Oh! Kurotsuchi! Run! Kurotsuchi's panicked voice filled the forest. Turning around, she used one of her bloodline limit techniques, the lava release, quicklime congealing technique. So much for keeping that as a trump card, a bitter part of her mind thought. Spewing a large mass of white substance onto the attacking element, the Iwa Genin then took a deep breath in while doing a quick succession of hand seals. All this while trying to run as fast as possible away from the one chasing her. What followed was the water release, water trumpet. The stream of liquid mixing with the previous technique, turning it into a solid mass that would be hard to break through. That should buy us some tea. What? Kurotsuchi's eyes widened in horror and disbelief as the hardened surface cracked. Kurotsuchi? Akatsuchi, her teammate, asked, the fear clear in his voice. Just run, we have to get away from here, she breathed out, jumping to another tree as the barrier that also was supposed to stop the attack incoming broke like it was made of glass. Sand, the granddaughter of the Sushikage, thought to herself. Of all the things to be afraid of, I never thought I would fear fucking Sand. Just how the hell had the Kazekage turned his son into such a monster? But more importantly, how do we get rid of this guys? She screamed in her mind. They had been running from the three children of the Kazekage for most of the first day of the second test. And they still kept at it, like starved, desperate wolves chasing a prey. Can't they just give it a fucking rest? Don't stop running. Kurotsuchi decided to try another time, this time knowing exactly what the result of her attempt would be, with the same techniques as before. Right. Both her teammates shouted. With some luck, at least they'll live, she thought grimly. Poor idiots, probably thought they had a chance. That she was so damned good that she could escape this situation in her sleep and they were dragging her down. They always seemed to have the highest opinion of her. Shame that it seemed she would ruin that opinion in the worst possible way. Here's hoping they won't blame themselves. As soon as the two jutsus in the combo were used, Kurotsuchi started running again. It didn't even take a second before she heard the crack of the material behind her. The barrier breaking before she had even finished the first hop. What I wouldn't give to have something to move fast, the girl thought, lamenting the fact that she hadn't mastered any of the jutsu used to just move. She had been a fool, thinking that she had enough power to deal with anything that could cross her path. After all, she had a powerful bloodline limit, and as the granddaughter of the Sushikage, the chances of her being sent into a mission too dangerous for her were slim. And other nations would be too afraid to start another war to target her. Also, she thought, since it seemed that someone didn't give a damn about who she was. Even after she had shouted her name, for once using it to her advantage. The Suna boy hadn't cared enough to deign her with a response before he continued his onslaught with his thrice-be-damned sand. As the sand smacked the path she was about to take, Kurotsuchi stopped on a tree branch. Her expression turned grim, although there was the smallest of satisfactions on the fact that at least her teammates had gotten away. She heard the voice of the Sunanin behind her proclaim. She turned around, intent on looking him straight in the eyes. At least you will prove my existence. Great, she thought bitterly, he is crazy too. The dull sound of a kunai against wood got both Genin's attention, making them turn towards the three the auburn-haired boy had been standing on. When said Suna Shinobi turned back to his target a split second later, Kurotsuchi was gone. Why? Kurotsuchi asked, looking around, clearly very confused and trying to make some sense of the situation she was now in. Me, for my part, was cursing inside my mind. Of all the things to come across as we moved through the forest, we just had to find the Iwa equivalent of a princess being chased by Gaara of all people. Just my luck, isn't it? Princess, calm the fuck down and stop shouting, I told her, keeping an metaphorical eye out for any danger through web sense. Kabuto and Yoroi, for their part, were simply standing around like I told them to, ready to assist if needed. I wondered if the former was looking for a chance to do something though. Don't call me that. Of course she keeps screaming, why wouldn't she? I thought to myself, as I gave her my best unimpressed expression. I saw blood rush to her face, but whether it was due to embarrassment or anger, I wasn't sure. Anyway, we have to move, I said as I stood up and cracked my neck. We really did. Not only because Gaara could get to us anytime, but also because I wanted this damn test to be over already. I know where your team went, more or less. So, we'll take you there and then we'll be on our. Why did you help me? She asked, more like demanded, really, taking a defensive stance that made me want to roll my eyes. It was somewhat justified, but still. I had just saved her freaking life, after all. Because we are the good guys and we do things out of the goodness of our hearts, of course, I replied with a wide grin, which got all three people to raise eyebrows at me. I clicked my tongue at them in annoyance. Because you were shouting about being the granddaughter of the Sushikage, why else? I answered this time. Can you imagine the fallout we would have if you died in our village? The waivers. Right, because Iwa will surely care about that and not jump at the chance to declare war to Konoha, I countered instantly, not even letting her get her words out. It obviously annoyed her, but honestly, I didn't care. I was having a very shitty day as it was, what with having met fucking Orochimaru, having gotten the thrice-be-damned curse mark on me, that still burned my shoulder even if Kabuto had helped with that, and I had to keep the company of two people that worked for the bastard still. Now, on top of that, I had to deal with this bullshit situation and I really wasn't feeling up to being understanding and patient. If I wasn't so sure that I had dealt with the mind part of the cursed mark, I would have been worried. It was good that it was a 3 against 1 and I was pretty sure of our chances. Otherwise, this would have been a very bad situation to be so angry at everything. My grandfather wouldn't. Look, I really don't care, I interrupted again, which probably wasn't helping her temper, but I could care less about that either. We'll get you to your team, and then you can do whatever the fuck you want. I did what I wanted and avoided a war, now I just want to get to the tower and get some sleep. Now, Yoroi, get her moving and follow me. If she does anything funny, drain her. Sure thing, IG, the guy said, and I just knew he was smirking under the mask. Why, I didn't know. Don't touch me. Kurotsuchi screamed as she jumped away. Bloodlust. Princess, I spoke again with a smile on my face. You are gonna come with us, and when we find your team, I'll be very happy to not have to deal with you anymore. But I'm having a bad day so far, and I don't want to put up with your spoiled brat antics. How dare she? Stopped talking as my smile disappeared. Maybe we should have just left her, Yoroi pointed out, and, for a second, I almost liked the guy. Yeah, maybe, you know what, I don't know what we are still doing here, I realized with a sigh. We saved her, job done. Good luck, princess. Let's go, guys, and with that said, I stood up and walked away, looking for the perfect route to follow with web sense as Kabuto and Yoroi followed silently. They were a pain in the ass to have around, but at least they kept their mouths shut. Point for Orochimaru's lackeys over Iwa Shinobi. Wait, Kurotsuchi called out. I could use the help. Wow, that sounded painful, I pointed out, making her grit her teeth. With a deep breath in, I calmed myself a bit. Good. With that out of the way, let's get the princess to her team and finish this goddamned exam. Behind me, I heard said girl grumbling under her breath. Tough luck, the name had stuck. Keep an eye on her, guys. Now, let's go. And with that said, I jumped on a tree branch and started moving. I could feel the three of them following me, with Kurotsuchi right behind me and the other two watching her back. At least they were efficient foe teammates. As we traveled, I followed the trail left by her teammates with web sense, which was much easier said than done. After all, the technique gave me a 3D image of everything within the radius of the jutsu. It didn't give me colors, or scent, or sound, but I could see the shapes of everything. It was a weird thing to get used to, especially while I was leveling it, since it added more and more detail as it went. Focusing on the physical clues of where the two of them had gone was difficult. I had to guide myself with the scrapped bark of the tree branches that they had used to run away and little else. It wasn't the best, but I managed to at least keep track of the general direction they took, only straying a bit at a time when the signs weren't as clear. Soon enough, I was able to pick up on their presence. Or, at least, what I was sure was their presence, considering that it was two people alone. The fact that one of them was pacing around and the other was a pretty big guy, just like one of Kurotsuchi's teammates, only served to prove my suspicion. And, here we are, princess, I said once we stopped on a tree branch over the clearing her team had stopped at. The two had obviously sensed us, but both their guards came down instantly at the sight of the girl. A bit stupid, considering that transformation was a thing, but they were pretty worried, obviously. Kurotsuchi herself didn't even argue the nickname this time, as she literally flew the rest of the way towards the fat guy and engulfed him in a hug, as much as she could, considering the man's size. Let's go, I told Yoroi and Kabuto, who both nodded. Wait, the Iowa girl called out, but I had already put a hand on both of my teammates' shoulders by then. Less than a second later, we disappeared in a cloud of smoke with a flicker. Oh! Team Gaara. It was him, the red-haired Jinchuriki growled. Him. his sister asked, almost making him snap. The guy with red eyes. Kankuro guessed, showing his younger brother that he was more than a goddamn idiot for once. Yes, it was him, Gaara repeated, one of his hands balling into a fist until his knuckles turned white. The sand around them moved, making both his siblings tensed up before they relaxed as it crushed one of the nearby trees. If only I didn't need them, he thought with a snarl. Useless, the both of them. So, the bastard's gonna pay, huh? Good, the older brother let out a satisfied smirk. I can't believe these two, Tamrai thought to herself, wisely keeping the words to herself. Between Gaara's crazed bloodlust and Kankuro's wounded pride, they were going to ruin their mission or, worse still, get the three of them killed. Oh. Team Kurotsuchi. You okay? Nojiko continued fussing over her until then missing team member, looking Kurotsuchi up and down searching for wounds or anything of the sort. The blue-haired girl had obviously been very worried about her female teammate. Yes, I'm fine, said girl grumbled, still embarrassed that she had needed to be saved like some damsel in distress and then she had needed the Konoha Nin's help again to find her team. She would, however, admit that she owed the red-eyed bastard one. And she would find a way to pay him back. Begrudgingly, but she would. How did you end up with a team of the Leaf? Akatsuchi asked, sounding more surprised than accusatory, although Kurotsuchi should have expected as much. They saved me from the sand freak, she explained simply, gaining surprised looks from her teammates. The red-eyed one distracted the Sannin and then flickered me away. Said it was to avoid Iwa declaring war on Konoha. We would never do that. Nojiko exclaimed indignantly, much like Kurotsuchi herself had done not so long ago. Akatsuchi, for his part, grimaced, telling the other two all they needed to know about what he thought on the matter. While Nojiko argued her point with their male teammate, Kurotsuchi frowned. For as much as she denied it, she knew there was a fair chance that her grandfather would have done just that if she had died. And even if he hadn't wanted to, there were a considerable number of people that resented Konoha with a passion for what the fourth Hokage had done to them. True, war took lives and everybody knew that. But what the Leaf late leader had done was not a battle, it was a massacre. And as such, it had left a stain in the history of Iwa, a permanent mark of shame and weakness that many wanted to remove at any cost. There was a reason Iwa hadn't sent many teams to the exams. Her grandfather had had to pick teams that wouldn't cause issues with Konoha. As such, her death might have caused a war despite her grandfather's wishes. It would have certainly motivated the warmongering idiots to demand another war. And it was so close, Kurotsuchi realized with a shudder as she remembered the sand closing in on her. It was a sobering thought, that one. With as much power as she had and as much protection as she had due to her family, she could still be killed. Easily at that. And not only that, she could have brought a lot of suffering with her death too. Got to be more careful, she decided with a sigh. Oh. Ig Sata. I grunted as I felt a stab of pain on my shoulder, the cursed mark apparently deciding to act up after I used chakra. It had grown more and more noticeable through whatever Kabuto had done, as I used more and more jutsu. I needed to. Everything okay, Ig? Kabuto asked, feigning concern, and I almost scoffed at him. My mood was clearly not the best. What is more, I didn't even remember the last time I had been so angry and annoyed for so long. Which brought me back to my previous thought. Give me a minute, I said as I sat down with my legs crossed and closed my eyes. Going back to my mindscape, I mentally noted how it was probable that I would be doing that a lot more than I had in the past. Checking on the snake mind leech, I noticed that it had moved a bit, something that I hadn't thought possible. That prompted me to take a look at everything again. Evidently, there was something that I wasn't quite getting there. Still, I did my best to reset the bastard in the middle of the void and, for good measure, move the flaming purple chakra thing the pseudo-horcrux had brought with it towards a new place. I settled it outside the village, on top of a stone platform. I'll have to check on the bastard regularly, it seems I thought, more than a little worried that my solution wasn't as permanent as I thought. It didn't even look like it was as effective as I had thought, which brought all kinds of concerns to my mind. Difficult to know if this mood is because of how shitty everything has been for the last day or so, or if it's the mark. Guess I'll have to wait until I get to relax a bit to see if it continues like this. With a sigh, I opened my eyes again. Everything okay, IG? Kabuto asked, concerned on his face. My mind whispering me how fake he was certainly didn't help my mood. Every time I looked at the pair of them, it grated on me, wearing down whatever semblance of calm I managed to gather. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that was Orochimaru's plan all along. Yeah, I'm fine, I said as I stood up, my shoulder still burning from the chakra I had used before. I might need to avoid using chakra from now on, I thought grimly. And that sucked, mainly because it took away web sense, which was my most useful jutsu for the second test. It didn't matter though. I can manage, I reassured myself as I took a deep breath in. I had trained in this forest for long enough. I knew how to look for other ninjas in it. Maybe Anko had planned it, it was a distinct possibility. But every time she had pointed at something and told me that it was a sign that there was someone else using the training grounds, had taught me how to find others in the forest. Never mind, it was definitely her intention, I thought with a grin. Indirect teaching, I guess. Let's look for a team to take the scroll from and get this over with already. I think we can help with that, and Stranger's voice replied, and I suppressed the need to snap at them. Slowly, I turned to see the sound team standing on a tree branch. You three, you don't know what you are getting into, I warned, even if I knew it was useless. I sent a pulse of web sense, just to check on their equipment and make sure that they were exactly what I expected. I couldn't risk there being a surprise somewhere here. The kid thinks he can take on the world, huh? The guy that was supposed to be Sajuke's victim in this setting mocked. And I stopped myself from rolling my eyes. Yoroi, take the Maudi guy, careful with his hands though, he can shoot something out of his palms, I said, keeping it vague since I wasn't supposed to know that they weaponized sound. Kabuto, take the girl, she has some strange senbon though, look out for that. I would rush her though. Sure thing, I was almost starting to like Yoroi, if I was being honest. At least he was good at following orders. Or maybe it was because he was more of an extra than Kabuto. Whatever. Okay, Kabuto nodded. And you'll take me on? Asked the last member of the sound team. You sure you can? Running, free running, intermediate taijutsu, intermediate kenjutsu, I called out in my mind as he talked. With all those buffs and without weight seals, I found myself all but appearing in front of the guy. With a kunai already in my hand, I drove it right through the underneath of the Otonin's thigh. Another kunai buried itself on the remaining leg. Then I threw a punch right into his gut, followed by an uppercut to his jaw. The only sound the poor bastard made was a groan in pain when the first kunai cut into him. The next second, he fell limply on the floor. God bless energy skills, I thought, glad that I didn't have to use any chakra in that fight. And also glad that I probably wouldn't need it for the preliminaries, if they still happened. Doju. I heard the other male in their team call out, and when I turned, I noticed that he had been distracted at the worst possible time. Yoroi quickly took his chance and put the guy into a lock that allowed him to drain his chakra with one hand on his neck and the other holding into one of his arms. If I was him, I would have shot out a wave of sound from my remaining arm. Even if it didn't hit anything, it probably would have given me a chance to free myself. Evidently, the guy wasn't as smart, because he kept twisting and turning, trying to aim at Yoroi. Eventually, his struggles lost strength and grew sluggish as the energy was sucked right out of him. Turning my eyes to the other side, I saw Kabuto standing over an unconscious female sound ninja and pulling out a needle from his thigh. Apparently, he had tanked the girl's attacks. Not a bad strategy, considering that he could heal himself. And even if he couldn't, they knew I could use the healing palm, so it was still a solid tactic. Honestly, do I look that much like a kid? I did, I knew I did. It still pissed me off that I did look like a kid still. I had grown over the years, but I was still 13, half the age I would have probably been if I hadn't died. It was so fucking annoying. I don't have the mark under control at all, I realized, feeling my face grow pale as the thought settled in. It was ridiculous, how easily my temper got the better of me. It would have made sense, if it had involved my friends or something. But I was getting so angry at things that were mild annoyances at any other time. You do, a bit, Yoroi answered jokingly, snapping me out of my thoughts. That sucks, I replied with a grin, internally counting to 10 to regain some peace of mind. I couldn't be snapping at everything. I had to get myself together. What I wouldn't have given to be at home drinking some tea and chatting with my friends, or at the vet playing with the dogs and the puppies. But no, I had to be trapped inside a forest filled with ninja that wouldn't care one bit if I died and had 2 teammates that were just spies for a crazy Voldemort wannabe. I took a deep breath. There has to be a way for me to use the mindscape and stop the influence, I thought to myself, trying to send my thoughts to more productive ideas. We have to check them for the scroll, I told the others, and they immediately started checking their respective opponents. Meanwhile, I let my mind wander as I checked mine. Orochimaru had a presence in my mindscape, I rationalized. That has to be a clue. There has to be a way to use that. Do I kill him? Would that make the mark disappear? I want that power up, but is it worth it if my mind becomes unstable? Is there any other way? It wasn't worth it, I decided after a moment. I needed my mind at full capacity just to be able to keep up with anyone that was relevant. I couldn't become a mindless beast unless I had a Baijuwa backing me up like Naruto did. Otherwise, the power-up wasn't enough to make up for it. I also couldn't risk taking Sasuke's place in the plot, turning my back on my friends. I really need more time to take a better look at things in my mindscape, I thought with a grimace as I found the sound team's scroll in one of the guy's pouches. Until I do, I can't assume much. Are we done here? I asked, raising an eyebrow at the other two. I saw that, unexpectedly, Kabuto had found another scroll on the girl. That meant we had an extra. Good, in case we came across one of the other Konoha teams and could help, I guessed. Keep that one yourself, Kabuto, I said, getting a nod from the boy. Let's rush the tower, I really can't be bothered to stay in this place one more second than I need to be. Oh. You. I heard as the 3 of us entered the tower in the middle of the forest. Surprisingly enough, it was the first time I was there. None of my training sessions had taken me there. We had come close and gotten a look at it, but never stepped inside. I had guessed it was almost exclusively for the exams. Now though, that first impression was forever ruined as I heard a very clearly pissed off boy shout and a wave of bloodlust wash over me. I felt my shoulders tense, and my body ready itself for a battle. The pain that originated from my shoulder went ignored in favor of the threat that had appeared in front of us. No fighting is allowed in between tests, another voice interrupted, and I finally could focus on the people that were at the entrance. One of them, the one that had shouted initially, was Gara. Ha, he knows it was me. How? And the other was? I don't remember the guy's name, but he was Sannin, spiky black hair and a bandage running across his face over the bridge of his nose. I was sure he was a named character, although I couldn't quite remember who. Nevertheless, I was grateful for his interruption. The last thing I wanted after the forest was to deal with fucking Gara, especially at the moment, since he was still the murder-obsessed psycho he was before Naruto used his talk no jutsu on him. Actually, I didn't want to deal with anyone at all. I wanted to go to a room and sleep. And then be left alone to deal with the fucking cursed mark, because so help me I was fucking tired of breath, I told myself as I took a deep breath in through my nose and calmed down a bit. I looked dispassionately as the Chunin talked to Gara and all but dragged the Sannin out of the entrance hall. My team and I, after a moment, walked towards where we had to open the scrolls. You sure we have to open them? Yoroi asked, and I was sure it was just in his script or something. It was next to impossible that these two didn't know what the exam was about. We finished the test, no reason not to open them, I shrugged, very done with it all as I opened our scrolls. Hey there, Anko appeared in a cloud of smoke. Congratulations and blah blah blah. Now, she pointed at me. You are coming with me. You two go through that door, a Chunin will take you to a room where you can rest while the second test finishes. I must have looked like absolute shit, because I could see the concern clear as day in my sensei's eyes. You used chakra, she accused, although she still sounded more worried than angry. I did, I admitted. I don't know what this is, I continued, gesturing to my shoulder. But it's been messing with me. I get very angry very easily. And it hurts a lot, even more when I use chakra, which is the reason I didn't use a whole lot. You shouldn't have used any at all. Orochimaru left something in it to mess with me. I've dealt with it, in part, I confessed. Because there was no way they would let me keep the mark without a seal if I didn't explain things. And if I was going to go through all this shit, I wanted the goddamn power up. I needed it. Careful there, I thought to myself. Don't become power obsessed. I don't need to become Sasuke's replacement in the plot. Dealt with it, have you? Yeah, I thought the. I can enter my own mind, I interrupted, making her pause and turn to me. I entered it when I noticed that something was wrong. And I found the bastard inside, or something related to him, at least. I've dealt with it. It's still struggling and still messing with me. But I think I have it under control. Yeah, no, she denied instantly, although her face was thoughtful. We'll be the judges of that. How long have you been able to do that? She asked this time, narrowing her eyes at me, and I smiled wryly as I scratched the back of my head. A couple of years. And you just mention it now. I could almost feel bloodlust in the glare she gave me. It didn't seem to be all that important. I hadn't even found a use for it until now. Unbelievable, she grumbled as she started walking again, with me following right behind. We are gonna have to test that. That was the part that I dreaded. Because testing something in my mindscape meant a Yamanaka. And a Yamanaka meant that my secret could come out. I needed to play this right. Not for the first time, I wondered if the cursed mark was worth it. But it was the only power-up I could think of. That, or sealing a Baijua inside myself, but that last option had next to zero chances of happening. Now, how do I go about this? I thought with a grimace as I followed Anko. Anko led me right into a room with Hiruzen and, surprise surprise, a Yamanaka. The actual unexpected fact was that it was Ino's father, of all people, the one that was there. Ibuki stood to the side of the room, staring at me like he wanted to know all my secrets, which was probably exactly what was on the man's mind. So, let's see this solution of yours, okay, brat? Anko asked, and I wasn't even surprised that everyone in the room already knew what I had told her. Either they had a way to listen to our conversation from a distance, or there had been someone listening in and reporting before we arrived. How do we do this? I asked, grimacing as everyone turned to Inoichi. I know you don't like the idea, Ig. The man spoke understandingly, the familiarity we had gained with each other after the last few years shining through. Nobody likes having someone else in their mind. How do we do this? I repeated, my face showing how seriously I took this. My mind was my own. And even if Inoichi was a master of mind-related things, I would do what I could to fight him if he tried anything. No matter how friendly we were with each other. So, if these bastards thought they could just ask me to reveal everything about me, they could go fuck them. Breath, I thought as I discreetly did just that, mentally counting to 10. Ibuki hummed from his corner. You were getting angry, he pointed out. It wasn't a surprise that he had seen through me, really. You do have some control over it. I still remember how out of it Anko was at the beginning. I thought so too, the woman herself commented. But I don't remember well enough. I've tried to forget for a good while, after all. That's why I hadn't said anything about that. Anyway, Inoichi clapped, getting my attention back to him. You said you have access to your mind. He started with a small frown. Can you explain that a bit more in depth? I don't know the theory of it, like, at all, I explained hesitantly. But while I meditated a few years back, I accessed this place in my mind. It took me some time to realize what it even was, but I started working on it after a while. Looking through memories, organizing them, and protecting them, when I heard about your clan's specialty. No offense. None taken, the man reassured with a wave of his hand and a wry smile on his face. Now, can you tell me? And from there, the conversation /interrogation continued for a while, with Inoichi asking more pointed questions about how the entering and being in the mindscape felt, or how I had changed things and how I had tried to make the protections. He didn't ask for any of the details, which was a mild reassurance at best. Maybe I was just paranoid, or maybe it was the mark's influence, but I couldn't shake the thought that the man might have collected all he needed to get around my mind without me actually realizing. It was the kind of crazy shit that I couldn't help but expect of Jounin and higher ranks. The look underneath the mindset really made one jump at shadows a lot, I had come to realize. That. Inoichi started, once I finished explaining what I had done with Orochimaru's presence due to the cursed mark and how I had, supposedly, separated him from the chakra the seal gave. Speaking of which, I hadn't even got a chance to look at the skill I had gotten, frustratingly enough. The man seemed at a loss for words, surprisingly enough. Is it possible? The Hokage asked, speaking for the first time since I had arrived. A thoughtful frown on his face as he took a drag of his pipe. We've been focusing on the seal side of the mark since we first learned about it. Could we have dealt with it through the mind instead all this time? He asked out loud, and I was surprised that nobody had considered the approach. Although, I had only done so because I had access to my mindscape to begin with. And considering that the only marked person the leaf had was Anko, they didn't have many chances for testing. It sounds possible, at least Inoichi answered, unsure. Although, I would need to. His eyes darting back to me told me everything I needed to know. See it, huh? I asked with an uneasy smirk before sighing. I didn't know how inner strength would work if he entered my mind. I didn't know if I could stop him from seeing anything, or even be aware of anything. For a moment, I considered just entering my mindscape and destroying the ghost of Orochimaru. I had lied through my teeth and said that I couldn't. But I could also probably get away with actually doing it after some time passed and chalk it to not having enough time to properly try, what with the second test and all. Granted, I wasn't sure that I could kill the thing, but the point stood. How would you go about doing that? I asked instead. I felt like I was being stupid. Some part of my mind was screaming at me not to be an idiot. That this was a mistake and that I should be trying my best to keep my secrets. That nobody could be trusted. But that's the mark talking, I countered, and it was true, for the most part, at least. It was also true that I had been afraid of letting a Yamanaka into my mind since the beginning. However, I trusted these people. Ibuki not so much, but Anko, Hiruzen, Inoichi. I knew all of them, the latter two for more than a year. If I couldn't trust them, then I was already screwed to begin with. I can enter your mind with just a jutsu. And I could bring you with me. You can show me what you have done yourself, he added after sharing a look with the Hokage. I won't look at anything else but this ghost you mentioned and the purple chakra. That sounds reasonable, I said, forcing every word. I get it, kiddo, Anko offered with a sympathetic expression. But if he says he won't look at anything else, then it's true. I gave her a small smile for reassurance. It didn't quite reach my eyes though, because a corner of my mind was realizing that this was all a play, most probably. These people would probably go through with this even if I didn't give permission. They knew I was a danger now. They would have probably done this even if I had completely gotten rid of Orochimaru, if only to take a look at my mind and see how I had done so. There was no escaping this from the moment I was marked, I thought bitterly. I didn't remember Sasuke having to do this, but then again, you don't see everything in the series. And even then. These are all excuses, I chastised myself. Because I knew the truth. I had messed up. I had gotten greedy, or maybe the mark had influenced me, or a combination of the two. But the point was, I shouldn't have said anything when I arrived at the tower. I should have left them to seal the mark and be done with it. I wouldn't have gotten the power up, but at least I wouldn't have to do this. Let's do it then, I agreed as I straightened my back. Right then, let's get to it, Inoichi nodded and walked up to me. Right as he brought his hands up and was about to start his jutsu, I felt a hand on my shoulder. When I turned, I saw Anko behind me. I gave her a tight smile. There was no calming down from this for me, but the gesture was appreciated. Turning back to the blonde man in front of me, a part of my mind noted with interest that he wasn't using the iconic jutsu of the Yamanaka. But then again, I should have expected that, since that one was to possess someone and this was something different. Allegedly, at least. Once he finished the hand seals, he put his right palm firmly on my forehead with his fingers holding my head where it was. Then, everything around me blurred and I felt myself go weak for a second. The next moment, I was standing on my mindscape with Inoichi still with me. Anko's reassuring hand wasn't there anymore though. It was just the two of us. Right, where to first? I asked tersely, already wanted it to be over. Show me what you did with the Orochimaru presents, he replied, and I appreciated that he went straight to the point, even if his eyes belied how interested he was in my mindscape. I'll admit though, it improved my mood a lot when the man yelped as the ground swallowed the two of us and we entered the void representation. Over the years, as I worked on my mindscape, I had taken a peek at it from time to time. It always made my breath quicken, my blood run cold and my hands sweat, but I could push through it. I wouldn't leave Inoichi alone in my mind, even if I had to put up with this. What? What is this? I heard him ask. The worst thing I can imagine, I answered, not looking at anything in particular, since there was nothing to see. Once you entered the void, your senses disappeared. There was nothing to sense in there, after all. And that's exactly what I had created, even if it was in an actually restricted space. Once you were inside, it felt like there was nothing anywhere you looked. For now though, I thought to myself, as I allowed Inoichi to see himself and me. I was shocked to see the man looking pale and visibly trying to calm himself. And when he looked at me, I understood. He was terrified. Whether it was of the void or of me for creating such a thing, I didn't know. I've experienced some jutsu that block your sight, or your hearing, but this is different, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't know what he was talking about. Anko had used those jutsu on me too, and it didn't feel that different. Although, maybe it was because this was all senses at the same time. We are here, I informed him once I had floated myself, and him too, until we were right next to the presence. With a wave of my hand, I made it visible. I grinned widely, pleased with myself, as I saw the Sannin trembling and gasping, letting out a whimper from time to time. He was a mess, to be honest. And considering what he had done and what he had put me through, I had no pity in me for such a man. Why you? The shade pointed at me with a shaking hand. What? How? Having fun? I asked with an amused expression. Should have thought it through before you tried to mess with my mind, snake bastard. Please. And then the Sannin went silent, as I forced my will on my mind. So? Verdict? I asked. You are one scary kid, you know that, right? Inoichi asked, staring at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. I've been told that before, I admitted, not really sure how to take his words. Was that supposed to be good or bad in this situation? Instead of expanding on that, the Yamanaka turned to Orochimaru's shade and seemed to look at it and the surroundings for a minute or so. I simply stood there, staring at both presences and doing my best not to turn my eyes to the void. Let's see what you did with the chakra. It's the thing that I'm the most curious about, since chakra isn't supposed to have a manifestation inside the mindscape at all, he told me, and I frowned at that. Now, I was almost grateful for his presence. If chakra wasn't supposed to manifest, then what was the purple fire-like thing? As I willed the two of us to move to where I had set the purple flame, I couldn't help but wonder if Inoichi could do this by himself. And that inevitable led to me wondering just what he could do to me while. Lots of things, the man said, making me pause, startled. He gave me a wry smile when I turned to him and blinked. Most people have the same questions when we enter their minds, with permission, at least. And those usually are about what we can do. If we can do this, if we can do that. The answer is, we can do lots of things. I see. You have an impressive mindscape, he commented lightly. Most people have something more dreamlike, if that makes sense to you. It looks almost normal, but you can just tell that it's not actually real. They have less detail, most of the time. And even knowing that you've worked on it, the level of realism this has is something that not even some experienced Yamanaka I've known have. Thank you, I nodded to him, pleased that all those meditation sessions hadn't been for nothing. If I wanted to do something with this, I would try to change things without you realizing. Although subtle changes are the most difficult to make, those are also the most damaging, because the victim can't tell they happen at all. It would be like me changing the color of something or changing where something is. That makes it sound like my mindscape being so detailed is a bad thing, I pointed out, already making plans about how to change it into something much simpler. It sounds like that, doesn't it? He admitted, and I focused intently on his words. But no, because for someone else, small changes are a lot harder than big changes. Like using an axe to cut a silhouette out of a sheet of paper or using a wide brush to paint tiny things. I see. I replied with a confused frown. Let's say you had something simpler. Like a simple cubic room that's all white, yeah. He tried again, with a patient smile that told me it wasn't the first time he had this type of conversation. When I nodded, he continued. It would be much simpler to turn that white the faintest shade of gray, so that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. However, your mindscape has so much color and so many little details in it, that you would instantly notice if everything changed into one color or another. I think I get it, I nodded. It was a weird concept, at least to me. But I guessed things related to something as abstract as the mind wouldn't be simple. And thanks for the explanation. I know there was no need for you to tell me all these. You are a friend, Ig Inoichi continued, and I couldn't help but note that he sounded tired. I hate doing this kind of thing with friends. It always feels like an invasion of privacy. And that's because it is. No matter how many times I do it, or how close I am to someone. It always feels like that. I stayed silent, wondering if there was a reason for his speech. I hadn't even asked anything, after all. And while I would call us friends, he was still more the father of a friend than an actual, close friend. I blinked as I processed that. For Ino, I realized with a small smile. Don't worry, I voiced after a moment. I won't hold this against Ino. If I hadn't been looking, I probably wouldn't have noticed the relaxing of his shoulders. I still hate it though. Understandable, he nodded. And thanks for the reassurance. You have been a wonderful friend to Ino, even if she complains about you most of the time. Noriko and I know that you are important to her. No problem. Good. On that note, I wanted to thank you for helping with her train. I paused as Inoichi stopped mid-sentence and turned to him. We had just arrived at the purple flame thing. Ig. He started, and I grew worried at the horror in his face. That's not chakra. Concerned, I turned to the fiery site and tried to see where I had gotten it wrong. It was like fire, and that's how it had been pictured in the anime as far as I could remember. Not even my notes had anything about how it looked in the manga, so I assumed it was the same thing. So, what was this then? Ig, I need you to do your best to contain this thing, Inoichi ordered, sounding like he was trying his best to retain his calm. Instantly, I trapped the fire inside a cube of stone that I made as solid as I possibly could. After a moment, I started carving as intricate designs as I could, making sure to use Inoichi's advice from a moment ago. If this was as dangerous as the Yamanaka was leading me to believe, I didn't want anyone to even have a chance at messing with it in my mind. So, what is that? I asked hesitantly. That seemed to be a very corruptive element, as far as I could tell, Inoichi informed me, still visibly shaken by the thing. Which didn't fill me with much confidence, really, since that was in my mind. If you see anything purple around your mindscape, or if you see any of those gas-like bubbles that the thing had inside, make sure to check everything and make them disappear. I nodded instantly, taking everything he said in as well as I could. Meanwhile, I continued working on the cube, making it more solid, making more details. I even made details inside the rock. Those were more difficult to do, but there would be no chances taken with this. And now that I knew how to better defend my mindscape, I would make it a fortress. I suddenly felt violated. Just like the feeling I had heard people talk about when a thief entered their houses and such. It gave me a new insight into Naruto's experience with Kobyu back on that first year. But the thing is, someone messing with something so private, so yours, is horrible. And my mind was the ultimate definition of that to me. Even more than for most people, I would bet. After all, my mind was the only thing I still had of my past life. It was the only thing that wasn't IG. Even if I had accepted the fact that I was IG2 now, there was something special about my first life. Something that I never wanted to lose, even if I didn't even remember most of it. It was important, and nobody would mess with it. It's unfortunate that I don't think you can get rid of either of them, Inoichi started explaining, unaware of the thoughts I was having, which was funny since we were in my mind. At least, from what we've seen. The good news is that if they are contained well enough, they shouldn't be a problem. Orochimaru's shade is. He trailed off, apparently uncomfortable and looking for the right words. Well contained he seemed to choose. As for this thing, he signaled towards the now increasingly more solid and engraved stone cube. You are doing a well enough job, I think. Inoichi nodded with a wry smile that confused me. Am I doing something wrong? Is there anything I could do to make this stronger? I asked, prodding him for more tips. I would be damned if the snake bastard screwed me over with his stupid mark. This thing better at least be worth all this trouble, I thought to myself, annoyed. At least I didn't let this happen willingly. I would be very pissed off if that was the case. The worst part was that I had actually considered getting marked willingly, before promptly scotching that exceedingly dumb idea. I don't think you realize how difficult it is to do anything in someone's mindscape. Even for the people they belong to. The level of detail you can put on this, after so little time, is outstanding, to say the least. I don't think you'll ever have to worry about anyone messing with it, if you keep this up. Well, thank you. If not for the tips, I would have been happy with what I had, I told him, showing how grateful I was. I'll have to work on this some more, I mumbled to myself as I continued working on the cube. Ideas about how to improve my mindscape as a whole already forming in my mind. The man elected to simply shake his head at me. Oh. Hiruzen Povi. You are sure he's going to be okay? Anko asked once her student had been sent to rest. Many would have been surprised at the amount of concern coming off of her, but those were simply the people that didn't bother looking deeper than the mask the woman decided to use. None of the people in the room were such individuals. I saw the influence the mark left in his mindscape, Inoichi replied. I'm 90% sure that he has it under control now. And that 10%? The worried sensei shot back instantly. That's just because we are talking about Orochimaru's work, and that was enough answer for everyone present. His student was a notoriously crafty person when he wanted to, Hiruzen knew that very well. Still, that kid's mind is a fortress. Even I wouldn't want to try and do anything in it, especially something major. But after the tips I gave him, I would need an entire team of Yamanaka to try and do anything, when he is done making changes. And if that wasn't the biggest praise the Hokage had heard directed at the young satyr, then he didn't know what was. A fact that was made even more significant if one considered that said child had the attention of at least half the Shinobi Council, Danza and the village leader himself. But the mind arts were a field that many struggled to even understand, let alone work with. Inoichi was the person that knew the most on that particular subject, and to hear that a genin's mind would be out of his league was surprising, no matter how promising and prodigious said genin was. So, what do you think about the current problem? Hiruzen asked Inoichi. It should be under control, the Yamanaka clan head reassured. As I said, he should be perfectly fine from here on. I would like to, however, do regular checks on his mindscape with him, to make sure that it is still as under control as I think it is. A reasonable measure, the Hokage nodded. Soon afterwards, he dismissed everyone present. He had a more important meeting with Danza to attend to. After all, Orochimaru's presence inside the village and at such a time couldn't be overlooked. My first night in the tower in the middle of the forest of death was not the best, if I was being honest. I spent around half of it meditating and working on my mindscape. I didn't change much though, on the surface, at least. But I did improve it as much as I possibly could. Since I now knew that the trick was in adding details to make it harder for others to make changes, I added small stuff everywhere. I filled walls with internal designs and structures. I painted the inside of houses with pictures and drawings that I had made at one point or another when I didn't actually know how they looked, and I put an intricate maze-like design on the underside of the very ground my mindscape was based on. Eventually though, the weariness of the second test and all the time I had spent awake and working got to me, and I fell asleep. Sleep that was plagued by my usual nightmares, this time also accompanied by yellow slitted eyes, wide-fanged mouths and Konoha burning in purple flames. I was grateful that, at least, I managed to actually rest, even if it wasn't peaceful. The fact that we had completed the test in the first of 5 days was a boon too, since it allowed me to relax a bit and gather my thoughts, not to mention work on my mind defenses. My first day in the tower I spent either exploring the place, or what I could explore of it, and, when I found the way, sitting at the top of it making drawings of the site. Fortunately, I didn't run in with any of the Sand team's members, especially Gaara, for obvious reasons. I wasn't sure that the Jinchuriki would control himself if he saw me again, which brought all types of worries to my already concerned mind. Training had also been on my mind, but honestly, I still felt like shit due to the cursed mark. I could barely walk around and draw, let alone work out. And that brings me to something that I did do, which is to check the skill I got for all my troubles. Cursed Seal, First Stage LVL1. Sacrificing their own chakra, the user can access the well of chakra given by the seal at the cost of their own mind. Increases the efficacy of jutsu by 5%. Consumption 29 chakra points every second. It was something, that was for sure. Overall, it meant that I could basically throw all the jutsu that I wanted to and more through the span of around 20 seconds. Great, honestly, but it wasn't all that. Although, that was mainly because I didn't have jutsu that used much chakra to begin with. My techniques were great, but I had leveled them so much and they were so low ranked that they didn't require me to use that much energy on them. The fact that it didn't give me a number for how much this well of chakra actually was had bothered me for all of 5 minutes before I dismissed the screen and called for my status, mostly to check on stuff. So, imagine my surprise when I found something new beneath the chakra points text. Cursed chakra points, 0/6750. That's 10 times my actual chakra points, I realized with wide eyes. Was the mark this broken in canon? Then I paused and sighed. Of course it was. Sasuke matched a Kyuubi-coated Naruto with this shit. The problem, however, was the at the cost of their own mind part, obviously. I wasn't sure if that was taken care of with my newly improved defenses or if it would wreck those anyway and affect me like before I made the changes. It would be something to test in the future, that was a given. For the preliminaries, if they even happened to begin with, I would need to avoid using it. However, I needed to practice using it or, at least, see if I could even use it without any nasty side effects. With Orochimaru's invasion looming in the future, that was something that could make a real difference. Granted, there was no way I could confirm that the snake bastard would even attack, what with all the changes that had already happened to these exams. I couldn't risk not being prepared though, so I would have to test the mark during the time between the preliminaries and the third test. I also added to the list of things to work on, to create one or a few jutsu that were more chakra consuming, if I could work with the mark. If I had access to all that chakra, and only had so little time to use it, it was better to have something that burned through it like it was going out of style. Although, I didn't know how much I could get done in just 1 month. But I could damn well try, that was a promise. Those were concerns for future IG though. For the moment, I only needed to focus on the green treetops that could be seen from the top of the tower, the blue sky and the white clouds. Add a few birds flying off here and the distant sight of the village, almost hidden by the green. Not a bad sight for something called the Forest of Death, I thought to myself with a small smile before it turned wry. At least I have some calm before the shitstorm that's surely coming. Oh. Turned out that the first group to finish were the Sand Ninja, evidenced by the fact that they were the only ones in the tower with my team, making us the second group. And from there, it was easy for us to tell when someone else did so too. The third team was the one from Kiri, surprisingly or not. They looked like they had an easy time too, which I supposed made sense. Haku was very much Chuunin level if what I knew was right. And while I didn't know much about Chaojura, he was a named character that had been deemed worthy of a legendary sword, and that was enough to vouch for his skill. Their teammate though, I knew absolutely nothing about, but considering his team and how he walked calmly inside the tower, I suspected was at least competent. The fourth team was the only one with named characters from Kumo. They didn't look as fresh as the one from the mist, but they didn't look like they had a particularly hard time either. This sucks, I grumbled without much energy to myself. I barely know anything about these people. Stupid plot deviations. And that much was the truth. With all the changes, my folk knowledge was less and less useful as time went by. Which wasn't much of a problem, but since I could have had an advantage, I couldn't help but feel a bit cheated. This is what I get for not going civilian. Those two were the only teams to come in the second day. Come on, guys, I thought as I continued my drawing of the forest from ground level from the entrance of the tower. Only half paying attention to what I was doing, my thoughts straying more often than not towards my friends that were still in the forest. After all, changes didn't only mean some more or different teams would pass. It also meant that something could happen to the people that I cared about in the test. Oh. The third day went much the same for me. Relaxing, drawing, waiting. The next group to arrive were Kurotsuchi and her teammates. They saw me, of course, but didn't otherwise react besides the nod I received from the girl herself. And that was unexpected enough, in my opinion. The fact that they weren't pointing fingers at me and screaming like Gaara had was shocking in itself. As far as I knew, Iwa hated everything about Konoha. Didn't they? I wondered. Granted, Kurotsuchi had seemed relatively calm, all things considered. But that could be attributed to, me just having saved her life and her needing my help. Maybe I had gained some respect with that. It would be a nice reward for having brought the Suna Jinchuriki's attention to myself. And it would also be a relief if any one of my friends faced an Iwanin in the fights. At least I could count on some restraint if that was the case. All that was speculation though, but one could dream. After them came Team 9 and I was immediately on their faces, asking for the other teams. Ignoring Neji's scoff and Lee's screams, I listened raptly to Tenten as she told me how their days had gone. Unfortunately for me, they hadn't met any of the others, which made me hide a grimace. I thanked her nonetheless, and apologized for bothering them right after their arrival. Nobody else came that day, and my concern started to grow. Oh. Kiddo Anko came to talk during breakfast on the fourth day. She had dropped by a few times during my wait, but she usually didn't say much. Senseis couldn't offer actual advice after the exam started, apparently. So, she could only drop by when it was mealtime, since every team in the tower gathered in the same room, making it so that the teachers couldn't tell their students anything without the rest knowing. Team 8 is out of the exams. What? I asked, my eyes growing wide at her words. Hinata, Shino and Kiba are out. How? Apparently, they opened their scroll to give up. One of them was poisoned and couldn't continue, she explained with a shrug. But Hinata took the medical course, I pointed out, not sure why I was even saying that. If Anko said they were out, they were out. I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. There are dangerous things in this forest. An academy course isn't enough to treat everything, and she didn't continue on through that branch, apparently Anko replied, and I nodded slowly. I just thought you'd want to know. They are all okay. I nodded again, this time without hesitation. They were all right, that was what mattered. I was almost relieved that they were out, after thinking about it. At least the three of them, even if Kiba wasn't really a friend of mine, were fine and would remain like that. Anyone that passed had a risk of going against Gaara in the preliminaries, which I was sure were going to happen. And that meant a chance of them getting crippled for life or outright dying. I could try and convince them to give up that fight if it came down to it. But I didn't want to risk them being stubborn and ignoring my warnings. At least I had the excuse of seeing what he could do in the forest. Just telling them not to fight the guy without any evidence wouldn't help my case at all. So, how's the mark going? Anko asked after a moment of silence, and I sighed. She had asked that question every day, every meal. I'm doing fine. Everything still hurts, but it's getting better, I reassured. The only sequels I was having were physical, which I knew wasn't her real concern. My teacher was still worried that the mental aspect of it would hit me again sooner or later. And your mindscape? It's still holding strong, I interrupted, already growing tired of her questions. She was concerned, I got that. I understood. I was much the same with my friends. And that's why I wasn't snapping at her. Everything's fine, really, I continued with a soft tone. I check several times a day, and nothing's come up so far. I'll continue to do so, I added quickly, in case she told me not to let my guard down. I had no plans to do such a thing. And was told that Inoichi will check everything himself tomorrow around the time the second test ends. Good, she replied with a nod, her whole body relaxing as she slumped down on her chair. Good, she repeated, slower this time. I've been training with a Yamanakam myself, she informed me, and I raised an eyebrow at that. Was she saying what I thought accessing one's mindscape is, apparently, pretty hard at this? She paused to send me a half-hearted glare that I returned with a bashful smile. But we are already coming to some theories about how much better your method can be to the solutions with seals we've attempted so far. That's good, I commented, unsure. It is, she nodded, growing serious. Someone has the idea that it may even allow you and me to actually use it without any mental side effects. I think I know who that is, I thought wryly to myself. But you aren't going to try unless in a controlled environment, are we clear? And preferably not before I can test it myself. Although that'll depend on how long it takes me to actually use your method. I understand, I nodded. After all, I wasn't planning on using it on the preliminaries anyway. The only one that maybe could get me to use the thing, and still it was a maybe, was Gara. And I had to have pretty rotten luck for that to turn out to be the case. I'm serious, she reinforced with a glare. This isn't like you using your chakra in the second test, IG. Don't use the mark. I understand, I repeated, this time looking at her straight in the eye so that she could see that I meant it. After a long second, she nodded, apparently getting it. Say. I started when the silence stretched a bit too long. Would you mind if I made a drawing of you? I asked nervously. Oh. I mean, I have better curves than those. I groaned before sending an annoyed look at Anko. Why am I even putting up with this woman anyway? A corner of my brain whined. I had gotten the part of drawing her out of the way quickly, so that she would stop messing with me by changing poses and the like. But I hadn't considered that she could still be a nuisance without having to do that. Now, she wouldn't shut up about me getting something wrong about her figure or whatever. It had started with her hair, then her face, and now she had moved on to how she had a bigger butt or perkier boobs or less fat. I regret picking up drawing as a hobby. I mean, really, are you telling me that my legs don't look better than that? She asked, her serious tone breaking for once, revealing that she was very much having fun at my expense. It's official, ninjas are all a pain in the ass to deal with, I decided with a twitch of my eye. No wonder the Nara are like that. They are all the only relatively sane ones. Would you shut the F? IG. I froze mid-sentence. In a second, I stored the notebook and pencil inside a seal and all but flickered over to where Team 7 had entered the tower. Thank God for Naruto's loud mouth. My eyes scanned over the three intently. Naruto looked relatively fine, all things considered. His clothes were messy and torn here and there, but the boy himself looked all right. Not that that said much, really, since the blonde could shrug off many things. Sakura, for her part, was a mess. Her clothes were in a similar state to Naruto's and she looked a bit paler with bags under her eyes. But that didn't really tell me much, since I knew she wasn't the best kunoichi out there. She would have looked like that even if the test went normally. Her hair was still long though, but that was no surprise since my team had taken out the sound one. My eyes turned to Sasuke and my heart dropped. He looked even whiter than normal, his hair was sticking out in all directions, almost like he was trying to imitate Naruto. There were little cuts here and there and his clothes looked worse than his teammates. But the true tell was how he hunched forward to the side, how his left arm twitched and how his right hand moved, as if to massage his shoulder, before he thought better of it. All that, combined with the worried glances the other two sent his way occasionally, told me everything I needed to know. Sasuke was marked too. Of course, you arrived before us, Naruto boisterously exclaimed, hands behind his head. The boy couldn't quite hide how tired he was, but he did an admirable job nonetheless. Should have guessed you would. Why aren't you three getting checked at the infirmary? I demanded to know, ignoring his words. My eyes narrowed at the three of them as their backs straightened at the tone in my voice. Good, I'll put the fear of God in you three if I have to. What do you mean? We are F. If you say you are fine, I interrupted, my voice growing annoyed. There will be consequences. Well, you see, the boy grew nervous as he tried to come up with something to say. In the end, he only could let out a strained chuckle. I simply stared at the three of them. Sakura was looking at anything but me. Sasuke was doing his best to appear to be mute. What happened? I asked this time, the annoyance bleeding out of me, leaving me with just my fear and my concern. We were attacked, Naruto finally admitted, deflating as the will to hide it left him. You three are coming with me to the infirmary, right now, I stated, leaving no room for arguments. You've already dealt with the scrolls stuff. We just arrived, Sakura replied this time, and I stopped and sighed. Then finish the test so that we can get going, I ordered, nodding towards where they had to open the scrolls. Good thing I didn't say anything that would have them disqualified. Damn, Anko muttered next to me. You are going to make a scary dad when you are old. You say that like I'm not one already, I grumbled as I followed the trio. I feel like a goddamn parent half the time. An overprotective one, yeah, she nodded and I sighed. I guess, I admitted as I took a deep breath in to calm myself. I'm trying to work on that. Then everything's fine, Anko shrugged. Are you gonna talk with the Uchiha? I was going to ask if I could do that part, yeah. Go ahead. Oh. We don't even know what actually happened, Sakura explained once they got their scrolls done and Kakashi appeared. That last part had been a bit of a surprise, but not much, really. It had gotten me thinking though. I was very sure that Iruka was the one that appeared for Team 7 in canon. So, why had Anko appeared for my team then? And why had Kakashi appeared for Naruto's team? Was it just a small butterfly effect or was it something else? I ended up pushing those questions to the side though. I had more important things to focus on, after all. Like the health of two of my brothers and a friend. 1 second we were just moving through the forest, looking for a team to get a scroll from the Pinkett, it continued. And the other someone appeared from nowhere, grabbed Sasuke by his neck and bit his shoulder. When we tried to fight him, he kicked our asses, Naruto explained eloquently, getting a glare from his female teammates and a grudging nod from the male. I shared a look with Anko. Nothing else. I prodded, not too forcefully though. I wouldn't have taken it well if someone interrogated me after having to deal with Orochimaru and the mark. The Uchiha seemed to be dealing much worse than I had, judging by his permanent scowl and his silence. That made sense though. At least I had managed to fight back a bit with inner strength and my mindscape. He mocked us a bit too, Naruto added with a shrug, looking more than a little annoyed. I was just glad that he said it. It was little, but everything helped when it came to the snake. Can I talk with Sasuke alone? I asked both, the rest of Team 7 and Anko. Come with me, you two. The Takubetsu Jounin nodded to the door, forcing the other two to follow. They did so, grudgingly, but saying no to someone a few ranks higher wasn't something that many did. And Naruto probably controlled himself because I was the one that asked first. I'm fine. The Uchiha tried to look like he meant it. I had to give him that. No, you are not, I denied instantly, and his scowl deepened, the anger burned behind his black eyes. I smiled sadly at him. I know you are not. I went through the same thing. At that, his eyes widened, disbelief replacing his annoyance. I turned my head to the side and pulled my shirt so that he could look at the mark on my shoulder. His hand moved to his own, probably without him even realizing. Does it stop? He asked, and he almost sounded vulnerable. I hated seeing him like that. The pain will go away after a while. It'll be faster if you don't use chakra at all, though, I explained softly. The anger, though, is a bit more complicated. But it helps to know that it's fake. So, try to remember that. So, that's why everything is so annoying, yeah. I nodded. The Yamanaka can help you get it under control. They'll teach you how to. He grimaced and I put a hand on his other shoulder to comfort him. It sucks, I know. But it's necessary. His eyes moved to my shoulder, before he nodded. Good thing you are so good at taijutsu, right? I commented, my tone lightening a bit. The corner of his mouth twitched up. I counted that as a win. If you really need to use jutsu, though, I got his attention again as I continued. It'll hurt just as bad as when he put that thing on you. So, be prepared for that. And if you do, make sure it counts. He nodded. Who was he? Orochimaru of the Sannin, I answered truthfully. No need to lie to him about that. His eyes widened again, this time in fear. So, there's no need to feel weak, or anything. He kicked my ass too, I reassured, echoing Naruto's words from before. Why did he do it? Sasuke asked this time, and I remained silent for a moment. I have no idea, I lied. Although, the man himself hadn't actually told me why either. I just could make a very good guess from my knowledge of the series. For all I knew, he had a different goal this time. But with any luck, I'll kick his ass next time we meet and I'll find out. You are spending too much time with Naruto, the Uchiha replied with a shake of his head. I mean, if I'm going to be the god of Shinobi, then I better be able to beat up a snake. IG. Yeah. Thanks. Don't mention it, Sasuke. That's what brothers are for, right? Right. That's it, guy, for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.